Hello, and thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Mike Cordaro of Alliance Wealth Advisors based in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I'm here to talk to you all about the keys to capital allocation. And I think just given the title of the presentation itself, a good place for us to start would probably be to ask the question, what is capital allocation? And I think, in my industry, we do a very good job of using terminology that makes people confused or actually understand a topic less oftentimes than maybe they did going in. And so, my goal here today is to communicate to all of you to be understood, and over time and over the course of this presentation, talk about some things that may help you make better decisions when it comes to your finances. And so, let's answer that question. What is capital allocation? Capital allocation is the process of determining the most efficient strategy for an organization's financial resources with the goal of maximizing shareholder equity. A lot of buzzwords in there, right? Like I said, when it comes to financial jargon, things can get complicated really fast and unnecessarily so, to be honest with you. So let's translate it into English. What it means at its core, no matter what we're talking about here, is using the money you earn towards its highest and best use in a repeatable way. Okay? Now, I want to use an example of a book that I think, for this audience of up-and-coming business leaders is required reading. All right? That book is called The Outsiders. Now, I may be dating myself here, but I am not talking about the Socs versus the Greasers in the 1980s book and film with Pony Boy and all these heartthrobs here. I'm talking about a book by William Thorndike. What William Thorndike talks about in this book is how he asks the question, well, what makes an effective leader? What makes an effective business leader or CEO, right? No matter what the business is. Is it leadership? Is it vision? Is it making sure you hire the right people around you? Is it seeing patterns and understanding what products the market may want moving forward? All these things are certainly important. There's no doubt about it. But what Thorndike argues is the biggest and most important skill for a successful CEO is capital allocation. They need to understand where to put their firm's resources and make sure that they're doing that in an efficient way. And if you do that over time, your company will have success. Now, what I'm arguing here today is that whether it's a major company, whether it's a small privately held firm, or whether it's a household or an individual, that idea that capital allocation is the most important thing to long-term success holds true. If you think about it too, it's not just business. So for any sports fans out there, Bill Belichick, right? Bill Belichick is a lot of things. But at his core, in many ways, his success has been through capital allocation, right? So every NFL team has a certain amount of money that they can spend on players. Belichick, over years, has made a lot of interesting and even controversial decisions when it came to personnel. But when he was doing that, he felt he was using the capital that was at his disposal to make the best decision in advancing the team's goals, and that has shown itself to be true. Now, he often does things that are unpopular in the short term. He does things that the media will freak out about, but what he does is he sticks to a process of disciplined capital allocation, and so does Warren Buffett, Catherine Graham, and many of the other CEOs who are highlighted in this book. And like I said, if you take nothing else away from this speech, I would recommend you getting the book given where you are in your careers. So to use another example, this is actually my old boss. His name's Jamie Dimon. He's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. And what he came up with back in the early to mid 2000s as the CEO of JP Morgan was this idea of what he called a fortress balance sheet. Okay? Now, the balance sheet of a large Wall Street bank is a little bit different than a household. However, the concepts that lead to success, I think, are the same. And when Dimon was ridiculed and criticized at times before the financial crisis for being too conservative, having too much cash on hand, for not getting the returns that some of the other big Wall Street banks were getting at the time. And that's because he was sticking to this principle of having a fortress balance sheet, a balance sheet that would be protect the firm in good times and in bad, and prepare for things that you couldn't see coming. Fast forward to 2008 financial crisis. Many of the banks, you had Lehman Brothers, who was around since the Civil War, go belly up. You had Bear Stearns, another old school Wall Street bank, belly up, gone. Washington Mutual, bankrupt. A lot of these other firms needed bailouts. Now, JP Morgan not only didn't need a bailout, they went and they started buying some of these distressed assets because they were prepared. So in life, and you will find this no matter what we're talking about, the only guarantee is that the environment will change, okay? And so we better be prepared for that financially, whether it is at the business level or, like I said, the household and the individual level. So I'll go to a quote from Warren Buffett here, right? Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. What he's saying is, the tide in this analogy is the business environment, right? We know it's going out. We just don't know what time low tide is coming. And so you better be prepared. You better have your bathing suit on no matter what. So how do we do this? First and foremost, with any conversation I'm having with a client or a potential client, I want to start with the balance sheet. Okay, and I've said that term a couple times. Again, let's communicate to be understood. So when we say the balance sheet, what is it we are talking about here? We're talking about your assets and your liabilities. Put it simply, what you own and what you owe make up your balance sheet. So let's talk about this idea a little bit more. So a list of your current assets, anything you own, particularly when it comes to your financial assets, and then anything you owe, student debt, credit card, mortgage, what have you, right? You add those two together, you get your net worth. Now, net worth certainly is not self-worth, okay? That's an important thing to distinguish. But if you're talking about building wealth, right? When I think about it, what I think about is flexibility. What I think about is options. I want to be able to do whatever it is that I feel like doing when I feel like doing it. And you can make $1 million a year, or you can make $20,000 a year. You can create that flexibility and build that wealth based on making the right decisions with your money, rather than getting stuck in this cycle of, well, I'm making this much money, I got a raise, now I'm spending more, got a raise, now I'm spending more. This idea of life creep where we just keep spending as our incomes go up is what gets people into trouble when it comes to building wealth or not, right? And so your balance sheet is a snapshot at any given time. It lets you know what you should be focusing on, right, by doing this exercise a few times a year. And, to go back to the old Peter Drucker quote, right, you cannot manage what you don't measure. And so this is a way to keep score for yourself to see where is it are the areas that I need to work, and maybe where are things going well. And then it's an ongoing process. So that's step one. It's taking inventory of where you're at in life. All right, so step two comes down to beginning this idea of allocating, the money after you pay all your bills, and saying, all right, what's important to me right now? Where should it go? So, we're in March here. We have March Madness, so I thought I'd use a little bit of a basketball analogy here. And the first bucket you need to take care of first and foremost is what we'll call the layup bucket, right? It's 0 to 1 years. So by assigning buckets to your assets, you do it on different time frames, and thus you assign different risk. And so with my 0 to 1 year money, right, I always call it a life buffer. It's essentially just a rainy day fund. I shouldn't take any risk with this, right? And it depends where you're at in life. So my 24-year-old self certainly had a different life buffer than I do now at 34 with, a young family, a house, no longer renting, things like that. So it changes, right? The short answer is always it depends, but you still need to have this bucket taken care of first and foremost before we do anything else, right? And so some examples, just a money market fund, a saving account, having it off to the side, not commingled in your checking account that you're using every day, but it's set aside because things will change, things will go wrong. We don't know when, we don't know how, but if we fund those things up front, it's no problem. And we're not taking on debt. We're not reaching into places we shouldn't because we funded this bucket first. The second one, going to my guy MJ here. Again, might be dating myself, but there's no way I wasn't putting him up there for the mid-range picture. So this mid-range bucket, what is it? It's 2 to 10 years, let's say. Okay. Now, this concept of inflation, which I'll get into in a moment, and I'm sure you're hearing a lot when it comes to the news and things you're reading every day. What it is at its core is it's limiting your purchasing power. So as the cost of goods go up over time, right, in any economy that's growing, you need to print a little bit more money over time so that goods and transactions can happen and take place. However, that means the converse of that is that your money is worth less over time. And so this bucket should be some combination, the idea of preserving and growing in order to keep up with that purchasing power as the cost of things go up. And again, short answer, it depends. This is why, if you're working with somebody, you really need to make sure that they understand who you are, how you think about money, and what's going on in your life. Otherwise, there's no way that they can understand exactly how you should be investing your money. And so, this could be an individual brokerage account, a revocable trust, a health savings account, but the main takeaway here is, you're planning for the future and making sure that you're taking care of things in the present as well with this mid-range bucket. All right, number 3, the 3 ball, right? So this is where you should be taking the bulk of your risk. I always tell people, don't worry about what's going on in your retirement account when you see the market, sell off or, things are going crazy in the world, because that's always going to be the case. And so if I'm taking the risk with the right bucket, I don't really necessarily have to worry as much about the day-to-day movements of the market because this is 30-year money. In your case, for most of this audience, this is going to be 30 to 40-year money. So stick to the plan, take your risk in the right bucket, making sure you're using the right types of accounts, and you can sort of go on about your business without worrying about, today, tomorrow, next week, or even next month, because you've staggered your risk out to the longest term money. This is the last money, you're really ever going to touch. So what I'm outlining here with this bucket approach is this idea of saying, I need some amount of money to preserve and to protect, and I need some amount of money towards growth. Now, you guys in this audience here is going to be, for the most part, all the way towards the end, towards growing, right? You can take more risk because you are younger, because you have less fixed costs. And so over time, as we get older, that mix of preservation versus growth changes. But just avoiding, again, this jargon and saying, what am I trying to do with this money? I'm trying to preserve. Okay. And then what am I doing with this money? I'm trying to grow it. I'm trying to make sure my wealth is compounding. And if I can get that mix right, again, we insulate ourselves from the volatility that comes with the markets, particularly in the short term. So step 3, right? Here's the easy part. Get a plan, get a process, and then set it and forget it. So it seems boring. It seems like it's never going to happen. But our best friend, if we start early, is time. And that's when things get really exciting over time, is when we stick to this process. You're going to turn around 5, 10, 20 years down the road, and you're going to say, wow, this made a big difference. And it's something we often lose sight of. I think as humans, we are often focused on what's right in front of us. But by having this plan where you can stagger out your timeline, making sure you're doing what's good for today, but also what's good for tomorrow, will lead to good outcomes over time. So, I think a lot of this is theoretical, particularly when we are younger. But what we can show you right now is that the math works. Okay? So what this chart shows is if I need to save $1 million in retirement, right? Big round number. And let's say you're going to get a 6% return. So it depends how much risk you take. It depends what you're invested in, all of that stuff. Sometimes it might be more than 6. It could be 8. Sometimes it might be less, depending on how you're invested and why. But let's just say 6, and that's a very reasonable number if you look at the last 100+ years of investment returns. This chart will show you what you actually need to save month to month in terms of your income to get to that number, right? So you can see when you're 20, pretty reasonable. $360 a month. As you get older, it gets harder, right? The hurdle rate becomes higher. You need to save more. And so it's always important to start young, even though our initial reaction is to say, well, I'm going to wait till I get that raise. I'm going to wait till I make more money. Life is always going to get in the way. And so, like I said, time is either our best friend or our worst enemy when it comes to this topic. And so if you get started early, it actually is a pretty reasonable goal to expect to retire as a millionaire. So we talked a little bit about inflation and why do we need to do this bucketing? Why do we need to do all these steps, right? Why do we need to think about this? Why does this matter to you? And the truth is, the single biggest threat to our financial wellness over the long term is inflation, okay? So the chart on the left, you can see the purchasing power of $1 million, right? With inflation running at, let's say, 4%, which is the longer term average, let's just say I said, here's $1 million, but you have to keep it under your mattress for the next 25 years. When that time came, you would have lost half your value just by sitting in cash, okay? And like I said, that is because the dollar over time will become worth less as more dollars are printed as the economy grows. So we need to protect that purchasing power. Now, today, we're at the highest inflationary environment in any of our lifetimes, really. If you weren't making financial decisions in 1980, you have not seen this before, and thus you may be unprepared for how to make decisions in this environment. So right now, we're running anywhere from 6 to 10% in the short term, and that will have a tremendous impact on your purchasing power. The cost of things will go up, and even if it doesn't go up in a large way, it still is going to matter. Now, the other chart is really important, right? Because while inflation, measures of inflation are essentially an average, there are many things in our lives that go up much faster than that average, right? So what this shows is college, healthcare, and housing. Three things that matter to us and that we can't really get around to some degree, right? Whether it's our own education, whether it's for our children one day, the student debt that many of us have taken on. If you look at how fast it's growing versus how fast wages are growing, which is that last and fourth piece, we better be able to figure out how to fund that difference, right? Because inflation is growing faster than wages in most cases, and therefore you need to invest your money in something that helps you keep up with it. So going back to that idea of being a business leader and being able to manage your way through business cycles, right? This is something I'm always looking at in studying the economy and studying markets, making sure that I understand sort of where we're at in the credit cycle, right? Are profits and earnings going up? Are they going down? Those are some things we look at in terms of where we're at in this economic cycle. But you could simplify this very, very simply put when it comes to your life, your household, your investing. It's emotions. It's psychology, right? So at different parts of the cycle, greed is the primary psychological emotion that people feel. It leads that and drives that decision making. And when things get bad, that it becomes fear, and this cycle goes on and on. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know how, but we know that this is how it works. And so as long as we're aware of that, we can make better decisions regardless of the environment, regardless of the cycle that we're in. When it comes to emotions, right, it's the biggest driver of returns for many people. And you could see this chart here, just looking at the blue chart there. The S&P 500 from 1990 to 2019 would have got you almost 10% if you just put it in an index fund, you didn't touch it, right? But Fidelity Investments did a look at all of their investors, all the investors that had accounts with them, and found that the average individual investor actually got half of that. Now, what drove this, right? They had access to the information, they had the ability to trade whenever they wanted, and they got half the return of the index. How is that possible? It's because if you do not have a process in place, emotions eventually take over, okay? And that goes with anything in life, but particularly with investing. And so having a process to protect yourself from emotional reactions prevents you from making mistakes. And you could see, the numbers are very stark. On this theme, you could see, trying to sell, getting in and out of the market is impossible. Anybody, whether they're in my profession or not, who tells you they are able to do that on a consistent basis is either mistaken or lying, okay? And so if you look at these numbers, if you missed just the 10 best days in the market from the year 2000 to 2019, you had an 8% return go to a 4% return. And that's because the best days in the market often follow the worst. And so trying to get in and out is impossible. And that's why the bucket approach that keeps you invested with the right buckets of your money saves you from trying to trade in and out. If you miss just the 30 best days over a 20-year period, you actually lost money. So you went from up 8% to down 1%. If you miss the 50 best trading days over a 20-year period, you then lost over 5% of your assets, okay? And so it is not about timing the market. You can't do it. It's impossible. None of us can. But if we give ourselves time in the market by taking the right amount of risk, by bucketing out our assets, we can avoid these mistakes that lead to compounding in reverse, essentially. So here's the difference, okay? Which game do you want to play? Do you want to be an investor or do you want to be a speculator? Studies consistently show that day traders lose money. Just a fact of life, and it's for all the reasons that I've mentioned in the last few minutes. So according to the Social Science Research Network, a recent study of Brazilian investors said that 97% of day traders actually lost money over an extended period of time. And so, I don't want to be a trader, right? A lot of people do it. It seems cool. It seems sexy. You can make that big buck. I'd rather be a long-term investor every time. And so you may say, well, look at that. That's not actually how, the market works, right? It doesn't go straight up. That's absolutely true. It doesn't. But when you zoom out, it actually looks a lot like that, okay? So unfortunately for us, we don't get to determine at what point in the market, we get to have our prime earning years and where, what era in life we get to live in, right? But if we take risk with the right money, we remain patient, we remain long-term investors, you can see the trend is in one direction, okay? And, from 1870 to today, there's been a lot of bad things that have happened. And at the end of the day, you didn't lose money if you didn't sell and if you took risk with the right amount of money. And so, this sort of shows you that it bears out over the long term. And if we stay focused on that long term versus, what's right in front of us today, all the noise, all the news, all the alerts on our phones and the emails, right? We have to ignore that. We have to stay focused on what we're trying to accomplish, which is over the long term to be independent financially, to be flexible financially, and to have wealth financially. So it's playing the long game instead of the short game, right? And this is the case, I think, for many things in life: relationships, knowledge, our physical health, right? It's very easy to play the short game, but the long game is sort of where these long-term dividends get paid out. And so it's this game of instant gratification versus a gradual progression, realizing there's no magic bullet, but having a process can, in fact, get you there. And so what we always say, just to wrap up here, it's not investing, it's not planning, it's nothing other than our behaviors over a long period of time. That is what is going to dictate our lifetime returns, our long-term outcomes. It's more important than anything else. And so I will end there. Thank you very much for having me. Look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the conference.